Greetings, everyone tuning in from wherever you're coming from. Thank you so much, Deborah, for that really warm welcome. Uh, just to give you folks tuning in a sense of some of what we're going to be getting in this hour that we have together. In the conversation that we had planning this, we were talking about things like the racial wealth gap, the nonprofit industrial complex, wage theft, worker exploitation, taxes, unions for folks in California like me, AB5. So I'm excited to just keep going with all of that, especially in the world of theater making. So we'll start by introducing ourselves, just our names, pronouns, visual description, and how we're each entering this conversation. So greetings, folks. My name is Tiara Allen. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a light-skinned Black woman with freckles. I have pink translucent glasses, a thick braid, and multicolored earrings. I am entering this conversation with a lot of gratitude for the breath in my lungs. Just needing to name, I'm coming from occupied Huichin in Oakland, California, where there is still toxic smoke everywhere up and down the West Coast. So I come with grief for my breath and rage that this is the situation that we're in. I'm also coming really hungry for this conversation as an artist from low income, working class, cash poor community. And I'm excited to have a conversation about finance, money, and the arts that isn't only centering people with wealth. And so we'll just sort of pass it to keep introducing folks. Daniel, would you take it, introduce yourself, and how you're entering this conversation?
Totally. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Park. I use he, him pronouns. I am a light-skinned, multiracial, white and Korean man. I've got long black hair that's tied back at the moment. And I am sitting in front of a fake Keith Haring mural on my wall with a teal background behind it. What am I coming in with? So I just put on a conference this last week for my workplace, the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. So a lot of what we're talking about has been on my mind, and I've been thinking about it a lot, and organizing events. So knowing how hard that is, so just sending some love and some appreciation to all the folks that helped make this event possible. Yeah, and excited to get to talk about this and dive into it, and not just talk about how awful the systems are, right, that currently exist, but what are the new models that can take over, that can fill a power gap as we slowly but surely see capitalism dying. Yeah, and I'll pass it to Amy.
I'm Amy Smith. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with hair that is a little bit bluish and a very bright green t-shirt on, calling in from Sakamachin-ing, Philadelphia, Lenape-Hoking. And I'm coming into this conversation, like Daniel said, really fired up to talk about the situation we're in now, but also dreaming about a future that is more just and inclusive for all folks that want to be participating in the arts ecosystem. And with that, I'll pass it to Dialect and Pam.
Peace, what's going on? I'm Dialect.
I'm Pam.
He, him.
She, her.
Yeah, and we are coming from occupied Lenape land in Brooklyn. And I guess how are we coming into this?
Wait, we have to describe ourselves.
Oh, yes, also describing ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm a light-skinned Black man, clear skin with hair that is desperately trying to escape my hat. And I have a blazer with many shiny dots on them.
Hi, I am a light-skinned Filipino Chinese woman with my black hair in a bun and a reddish type shirt thing on.
Yeah, and we're coming into the space. I guess I'm coming in, I'm always grateful to talk with humans, especially humans who recognize that they're artists. That's always fun, but I'm a little frustrated because we're talking about things that we have to talk about. While I think that it's wonderful to share these things and these insights, and I'm excited to receive a lot of stuff that you guys are going to say, it would be nice if this panel could be, hey, isn't art fun? Let's talk about how fun art is and how we enjoy doing it. But I'm really interested and excited about us continuing to do this work, and to the point where we can then be a little more wrinklier and have that panel on how art is fun.
Yes, no, I love that. I'm a financial planner, and I always say that my goal is to work myself out of a job. I really believe my job shouldn't have to exist, but the financial system is so frustratingly and stupidly complex and done by design. And I think that I am really excited to come to the conversation and just kind of start removing the blinders a little bit, and also hopefully just like come away with some really great action steps that we can take together.
Amazing. So just continuing where we're already going, I'd love to hear more about the interventions that each of you have been making in this space of ethics, labor, and money in the world of art making. I'd love to stay with Pam and Dialect to kick that off. What interventions have you been making, and how did you get there?
Oh yeah. Whew. How long do we have? I'm just kidding. No, we've been doing a lot, especially in recent years, getting very involved with Prosperity Now and the Racial Wealth Divide Initiative there. And the reason why I did it is because when I started Brunch and Budget, I found that over half of my clients are people of color, and I was having to plan for them differently than my white clients. And we also serve a lot of creatives and artists who are POC and whose parents are like, what the hell are you doing? Why aren't you a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, blah, 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 whatever. Right. And so I think that we're entering these non-traditional work and careers, and we're also still having to deal with the systemic racism that puts us in a place where it is really difficult to actually do this work and to be an artist and to have a sustainable living. And I think that's really where our work comes into this, in terms of doing the podcast, in terms of doing workshops for artists specifically. We actually have a workshop tomorrow on how to go from artist to artist entrepreneur. And a big part of our work is around building community, and also sharing as much and spreading as much information as possible in these communities.
Yeah, the racial wealth divide is very important to us. And it's something that, at least in my life, it's probably the reason why I do art. I'm biracial. And when I said I identify as a light-skinned Black man, it's because my white family doesn't identify with me. And there's definitely a financial lens that goes alongside of that. When my dad died when I was young, the white family tried to keep the money from the Black side of my family. It was a whole thing. So when I think about the racial wealth divide, it's a very literal and physical thing. And that's always been a part of my art. Simultaneously, I've been a creative freelancer for my entire artistic career, and so have you. But no one has told us that. They've told us that we're starving artists. They told us that we're doing things wrong. They told us that we have to wait along for some benefactor or some label or some theater to be like, you're the awesome thing, and then pick you up and make you a thing. I came to the States because I wanted to rap, and I would go up to like the rap labels and the radios and stuff like that. And they would say, what is your song for the club? And I was like, I don't have a song for the club. That's not what I made the song for. And they said, well, then you don't have a business model. And I've stumbled and fumbled my way along through creating art and having a business model. And then when we started talking together about the financial aspects of it, we realized that the same way they bamboozle artists is the same way they bamboozle everybody. This whole Uber gig economy phenomenon.
This whole like hustle life, the glamorization of like working for yourself and being a freelancer, that's all bullshit.
Well, no, it's not just all bullshit. It's they turned everybody into an actor or a writer or a singer. You're all struggling, fighting for your gigs, paying for your own things, doing your own taxes, and not having to have the institutions worry about nothing.
So the interventions that we've done, especially in the last several years,
to get more pragmatic,
is we have done a lot of work around trying to bridge policy and the practicalities of personal finance together, especially when it comes to closing the racial wealth divide, doing financial coaching through racial wealth divide lens, and also helping people understand the role that art and media have played in perpetuating the racial wealth divide and how to reverse that.
We have organizations that work with children, that work with families, that work with adults and freelance professionals. We have one-on-one financial services, group planning financial services, a podcast network where we have several podcasts where we talk about race and wealth. It's literally called the Race and Wealth Network. And we're here to get down, rhyme, chill, and provide with everybody who's got our backs. Yeah. There's more stuff, I guess.
Stunning. Thank you. I'll take this moment to share with folks listening in that, we are wanting this to be a dialogue, even with the constraints of Zoom and the time that we have. So as, if there are questions that are coming up for you, you can put those in the chat, and some, amazing Zoom angels will try to get those over to us, so that we can try to incorporate them. Unfortunately, likely won't be able to get to everything, but we would love to hear from you, and all these panelists would love to speak to what's coming up for you in relationship to what you're hearing about. So I'll continue on. Amy, actually, I'd love to hear from you about the interventions you've been making and your journey to them as well.
Sure, yeah. I was nodding my head like crazy when Pam was talking about the glamorization of being an independent artist and freelancer. One of the hats that I wear is I do tax preparation for artists, mostly in Sakamachin in Philadelphia. And so I have seen over many years, like 15 or 20 years that I've been doing that work, all the various ways that artists have been sustaining or not sustaining their artistic lives through what is really essentially a very exploitative model of the 1099 gig economy lifestyle, where organizations are taking advantage of the fact that they don't have to pay into Social Security and Medicare. And also creating a situation where a lot of artists don't know how to file their own taxes and have to hire someone like me. And like Pam, I want to make my work, I want to stop having artists pay me to do tax prep, even though I keep my prices really low. So some of the interventions I've been doing before being 100% freelance, which I am now, I ran a nonprofit organization for 26 years. So I'm recently, have recently escaped the nonprofit industrial complex. But while I was there, I initiated some new policies in our organization to try to address the racial and gender income gap by instituting an equal pay policy in our organization. So I was really proud of that. And since then, in my freelance work, I created a business model for myself where I personally am middle class, but I have class privilege and I have access to family wealth. So I have a business model where I kind of charge my wealthier clients or higher income clients more so that I can do pro bono work for lower income folks. And I prioritize working with lower income folks and folks of color in my financial advice giving, financial literacy work, and tax prep work. And then as a kind of advocate, I never know what word to use. I'm not crazy about the word activist to describe myself, but some of the work I do is in service of projects that I think are bettering the field. So one of those is a project called Creating New Futures, which came out of right at the beginning of the pandemic. A bunch of dance artists got together to talk about all the unethical cancellations that were happening and the ways that presenters were exploiting dance artists through their force majeure contract clauses. And so we put together this 140-page document that's really kind of a manifesto about how we can create guidelines and principles to improve the situation in the future between dance presenters and artists, and also between artists and their dancers. So that's one project I've been really excited about. We're in phase 2 of that project now. And then I've been a little bit involved with a new pre-union for dance artists called DANC, Dance Artists National Collective. Oh, now I'm not sure if that's what it stands for, but DANC, which is working towards trying to build people power among dancers who have been historically really exploited workforce in our field. So those are just a couple things I'll mention, and I can certainly talk more later about other projects.
Thanks, y'all. This navigating Zoom. We know we have a question. We are definitely going to be talking about AB5 in this conversation. So thank you to to our audience folks who are like, can we get into that more, please? But Daniel, would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, totally. First, big endorsement for Amy Smith's services as a client of Amy's. Highly recommend. Again, also a few ways. So I got into this work primarily. I was doing a lot of organizing around racial justice in the cultural sector in Philly, and there was a really specific moment where racist thing happened at a small theater company in the area, and it was a PWI, and I was talking to some people who were involved. It was like a 3-person show, something like that. And I was like, well, why don't you just walk out? Like, you actually could do something here. You could walk out. You have power. You are the production. Why don't you just like use that labor power and make a statement about it? And they were like, we can't do that. Like, there was this clear fear, and I was like, well, okay, so what's up with that? There are these white artists in a show that is in part talking about race, who don't feel like they have the power, the capacity, the agency to actually do something about that. And so what's going on here? And so that's kind of what got me thinking about labor. I mean, and you know, this is not a new thought certainly, but it was a new to me thought. How do I think about labor justice and labor organizing as directly tied to racial justice and racial equity work, and right, both of those things being directly tied to collective liberation? And then sort of on a parallel track, I have a small company of my own called Obvious Agency, and we didn't know it when we figured out sort of how we wanted to run. There's 3 of us. We were like, yeah, we want to work by consensus. That feels really important to us. We know that we all own this work, that it's shared, we're devising, it's collaborative, things like that. And so we came up with this whole structure, and then a while later, I started working for my current workplace, the US Federation of Worker Cooperatives. And I had no idea what a worker co-op was at that point, and I don't know how many people watching do, so if it's useful later, I can dive into that and give a brief explanation. But I joined and I was like, oh, my company is just a worker co-op, basically. And there's actually like a whole history and an infrastructure set up to support small businesses that are worker cooperatives. And we don't have to be coming up with all of this. Like, we don't have to be pulling out of our asses. We don't necessarily have to follow a traditional nonprofit model. Like, there are so many different things that we can do and so many resources that we have available to us. And so that's one version of it, right? Like, what is it when all of the workers at a business own that business actually, and how that provides a different model than what a lot of us are used to in the arts and cultural sector, where nope, it's very hierarchical. It's the board who has ultimate power, but then like the executive director or managing director who then also have lots of power within the, you know, things like that. So that's one sort of area of it. And then the other part is, and I'm not directly involved in this project, but I have a lot of interest. The Federation, my workplace, we also have a current project that we're in the process of essentially doing a pilot of in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, and we're opening soon in Pennsylvania, called Gilded, which is a freelancers cooperative. It's based on a model based in Europe called SMART that came out of Belgium. Ajaka Williams, who is really amazing, is the project manager for it and is like doing all of the research, is basically driving this thing forward. But the idea is that it's a worker cooperative for freelancers. It's being designed with artists sort of as like the primary audience base, in part because they are aware of the fact that like artists are the freelancers who often tend to have the least number of protections amongst freelancers and who often get treated the worst amongst freelancers. So they're like, and who have the weirdest gigs. So they're like, if we can figure out how to make this work for artists, we can make it work for everyone else. And so the idea of that project is one where, I mean, there's a lot of different benefits to it, including like health and medical benefits if you become a member, eventually upfront payments for invoices as opposed to like receiving it through time, tax, I know, right? Tax support help, a bunch of different things, which are really great, which all point to basically like this idea of cooperativism, of working together, of mutuality. Like, let's not all place ourselves as like individuals within these larger systems. Let's actually figure out how we can best come together to benefit all of us, and not just like us as individuals, but also our communities as well. Yeah, and I would say the last thing that's just like on my brain as we enter into this conversation, and that I'm starting to think about more and more now, is how all of this labor justice stuff in the arts is also directly connected to all of the other forms of oppression that we see. That like housing justice, for instance, deeply affects labor justice in the cultural sector. If we all had equal access to housing, labor would be way less, like concerns around pay would be way less of a thing because our rent would be equitable, you know, blah, 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 blah. So I think that's the other sort of intervention that I'm like slowly but surely getting into and getting involved with.
I'll share for folks who might not be accessing the video. There's been a lot of nodding, some sort of like, ooh, like kind of like holding back, like, wait, what? You're talking about what? Like those are some faces that I've been making, and like they're a little bit from other folks, just to keep folks in the loop. Let's keep going where we're going. Amy, you were talking about having a long history. Running a nonprofit, even for freelance artists who might not have like a main gig. Many of us are still interacting with nonprofits, are paid by those kinds of structures. So I'd love to break down more. What are some of the limits of that model? And then there was a question around. What could be alternative models for like a smaller ensemble theater, smaller budget, not into the millions of dollars, under 100K, really even under that is what a lot of us are working with. So would love to hear that about those things from folks if y'all have thought.
Yeah, I'll start because that was something that I brought up. The limits of the model, the nonprofit model are many. The nonprofit 501c3 was started in the 1970s by the federal government to basically control social justice movements, to control racial justice movements, the environmental movement. And since then, the corporatization of 501c3s has really led, as Daniel said, to a kind of extreme hierarchical model where the governance structure of a board of directors or board of trustees, which usually are people with a lot of wealth, because most nonprofits get a lot of funding from their board, so they will only consider board members who are wealthy folks and who contribute every year. But that means the people holding the reins of power and resisting change often are wealthy white folks in the board of directors or board of trustees. And then you have this corporate model, it's like we've just kind of swallowed whole what the consultants and funders have required of us, which is a corporatization of the nonprofit model for our arts organizations, where we have an executive director, an artistic director. Those folks are often on salary. And the pandemic has really revealed how much of a disparity there is between salaried folks in the arts ecosystem and independent contractors, freelancers, artists, because most of those salaried folks are still making some wages or making some income, whereas if you're an actor or a dancer or even a lighting designer, you're likely not working at all right now and not getting paid at all right now. So I think the limits of the model are that there are people, like I know Hope Moore is doing some good work around this question in the Bay Area. There are people who are questioning how the nonprofit model can be reformed or changed. But really, I just think there's so much structurally problematic about the model that it's worth considering how we can actually shift away from using 501c3 and instead use fiscal sponsors or other ways of I don't even want to start talking about the foundations and philanthropy and how problematic they are. But we need to move away from the 501c3 model and towards, as Daniel said, worker-owned arts organizations. And like Obvious Agency is a great example of how that can be done.
I will also say too, from the personal finance side, we have been fed this story that not only are you doing good by giving to a nonprofit, but you get a tax deduction. Mm-hmm. And so many people who do want to give to artists and who do want to donate to this work always ask, are you a nonprofit? I only donate to nonprofits. I only donate to charities. And there's this idea that to be a nonprofit means that you are doing this public good or public service, when really it's been a tax shelter for wealthy people. And I think that's also why the nonprofit model really needs to go away, because the average person is, one, not going to benefit from taking that tax deduction for giving a charity, because the standard deduction is, we won't even go into that, but you're not going to benefit from it in the first place. And we've also been taught and fed this idea that like, oh, I'm only doing good if I'm giving to a nonprofit, when really we need to think about how we're giving and how we're contributing and how we're sharing our resources in a different way.
Which is change, like, there's a lot of change going on in terms of how we receive information from trusted sources.
Yep.
And that was one of the things with donations. Like, I know my whole life people have always said you have to be very careful about who you're donating to. And you'll even see people who are like blustering about not wanting to donate to nonprofits that have, part of their donations going to operating costs, because they're like, no, it must only go to
directly
service
to the people.
Yeah, folks don't have an understanding of it. It's kind of what we're going to be talking about in our workshop later, is that like, people don't have an understanding of the inner workings of things, only want to see the flashy thing in the front, which holds up what I've always called the nonprofit treadmill, where we do a lot of flash, we do a lot of smiling, but don't really go anywhere. And Amy was really right in talking about how in the 70s, this whole idea, the 501c3 was created to make sure that they had control over anti-racist movements, they had control over social movements. And that's why people right now have learned not to trust individuals. People are very suspicious. It's being broken by, you're seeing the GoFundMes and you're seeing the people who are collecting funds and sharing them with like protesters or other organizers or people who are doing work. But right now, officially, that's still not a thing. And the whole thing of all of it, which I understand why Amy was reluctant to use harsh language, but really when we're talking about philanthropy is fake. Fuck them.
Yeah, it's true. Well, and if you want the numbers, there's $40 billion of philanthropy out there, and only 8% of those dollars go to POC organizations. So who's really controlling the wealth on all aspects, right?
Oh, and if we break down the numbers on those 8% of POC organizations, man, it's lower than the talented 10. B was wrong. But, if you break down the math on those 8% of POC organizations, there are not a lot of them who are on the ground working with people who have the least.
Yep.
Well, and what I'll add to, right, so is that one, so speaking of hope, right, there, and talking about alternative models, right, there's a transitional model, which would be a worker self-directed nonprofit, which is a model that takes it takes the nonprofit model and it kind of combines it with the worker cooperative model. For folks who are watching who want more information, the Sustainable Economies Law Center, the SELC, SELC, they've got a really great network of nonprofits who are doing this work. Hope did a workshop with them. They just did a workshop actually as part of our conference last week that I was really pushing a lot of our arts folks to be like, okay, so you're a nonprofit right now, maybe you want to change out of that model, maybe you're a big one, maybe you're a small one, right? Here's one thing that you can look at. There are alternatives. Because I think that we want to both critique like what the bad thing is and picture a new version for it. And I think one thing that I've been hearing a lot from my mentor recently is like, when we destroy that thing, we have to be ready for the power vacuum. We have to have our alternative systems like in place and ready to go and like ready to jump in and take over that. Amy, I think you had also mentioned like this idea of, the nonprofit model is just inherently fucked, period. Like it just is. And there's some work that we can do to fix it. But you had also mentioned, right, the hierarchy and the pay difference around like, right, we're seeing a lot of these nonprofits where leadership management is, for the moment, right, taking a salary cut in order to like help make things run more equitably, which isn't a bad thing. And I don't want to like shit on that, but I do want to ask the question of like, okay, well, what if pay had been more equitable from the beginning? Like, how does that change the need to furlough people, to furlough employees, if that money had been more equitably distributed from the very beginning, as opposed to concentrated at the top? And then now all of a sudden, one person feels like they have to martyr themselves in order to like save an organization, and still it's not enough, right? Because there are still all of these people who are working the box office, who are cleaning the buildings, who are doing all of these other lower paying jobs, who can't pay their bills right now, who are relying on PUA and all of these other systems that we're actually seeing disappear because the government isn't taking care of our people and doing the work that it needs to do.
And Daniel, would you be down actually to talk a little more about like what are cooperatives, what are collectives for folks who might be unfamiliar with that?
Yeah, for sure. So a cooperative is a broad term. A lot of folks, myself included, like when I was introduced to cooperatives, my understanding was a food co-op, right? Which arguably is like oftentimes are purchasing cooperatives, which means that like and specifically in my mind, a food co-op was a bougie ass grocery store in probably a Black neighborhood that was in the process of like gentrifying, right? And kicking out all of its Black residents that didn't afford affordable food to its residents, et cetera, things like that, right? And that those are real. That is in fact a thing. A worker cooperative, right, is oftentimes a different type of cooperative, though there are a lot of food worker cooperatives out there. A worker cooperative, the basic way to understand it is that it is a business that is owned by the people that work there, right? And then we use the term worker owners for that. And then the idea behind that is one worker, one vote. So those worker owners all have a say in how that business is run. That doesn't mean that there aren't managers. That doesn't mean that everybody is involved in every single decision, right? Committees are oftentimes a big part of worker co-ops, especially larger ones. It might be a matter of like, you know, the budgetary committee goes off and like creates a proposal for the budget and then brings it back to all of the worker owners to vote on. There oftentimes are still boards. Usually they are made up of worker owners, but sometimes like a nonprofit, that board might have some outside community-based folks as well. There's this whole like the 7 cooperative principles that are sort of supposed to define and drive any type of cooperative, whether that's a purchasing cooperative or a distribution cooperative, a shared services cooperative, or a worker cooperative. But yeah, so the basic idea is just like the employees have a say in how the thing is run. There are no bosses. We all are our own bosses. We can take care of each other. Larger worker cooperatives will still sometimes have employees. My worker co-op at the moment, we're in the middle of a production. So we have our 3 worker owners who are working on that production. We also hired a freelance creative producer to work for us. And then we also have a freelance sound designer who's working for us, right? So those 2 people don't have a say in how the company is run, right? But because the 3 of us as freelancers also totally understand where those people are coming from, it's important to us. We start by paying our outside artists and freelancers a thriving wage of $25 an hour, which like for us is still kind of low, but we're like, look, we are tiny, we don't get grants, like we are doing all of this fundraising on our own, but we know that life. We want to make sure that these people are paid well, are paid equitably. That's super important to us. We don't have them like, we have them doing hourly, like we have them at an hourly fee as opposed to like a stipend, because we recognize so often in the arts and culture, we're underpaying people for all of the work that isn't included as part of their contract, that's not outlined there. So we want those people, like it's not fun to track hours, but when you're tracking hours, you're gonna get paid more accurately, and probably more than you would if it was just like a stipended contract and things like that. But yeah, so worker ownership, workers own the business, one worker, one vote. We're here to take care of ourselves, and not necessarily, and it's putting people over profit. That's like the big things driving behind it.
Can I add something, Tira? Yeah, so I just, when I started researching cooperatives and collective economic models, probably inspired by my friendship with Daniel many years ago, I learned that some of the first worker co-ops and collective models were founded in Philadelphia in 1787 with the Free African Society. And since then, there's been a long tradition of centuries of Black collective organizations, and especially during the Civil Rights era, Fannie Lou Hamer started the Freedom Farm Co-op and other farm co-ops mostly in the South of what is currently called the United States. So I just like to shout out like the long history of collective and cooperative models, mostly invented by Black folks in this country, and the mutual aid societies or mutual aid mapping and mutual aid efforts that have been coming up since the pandemic started are really, they're like learning from and reflective of those past models. So, while I'm frustrated that the federal government isn't doing what it should be doing to take care of its citizens, I'm also gratified to see folks supporting each other in their local communities.
Thank you for that lineage, that sense of lineage for sure. I just also want to say there just continue to be like a lot of like nods and excitement sometimes when we're having these conversations. It's really exciting to be talking about some of those things in an industry where including, you know, artists at all levels, but including emerging younger artists, like, are exploited because of the joy that we bring, because this is a sacred calling we have. There was a question about in this space of labor, money, ethics, advice for specifically younger artists, emerging artists, that I think is probably applicable to many folks. I'd love to hear any thoughts that folks have on that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Let's jump in. So on that, with like younger artists and stuff like that, the thing that's really mostly important is to talk about what's going on. The reason why every generation of artists will have the same type of laments that we come and bring to each other is because when we're in the process of doing our art and being part of our art thing, we are told that we are part of a competitive structure, that we are competing against our peers, and that if we share any information with our peers, that we will be then in some way disadvantaged. I always share when I'm doing my workshops as a musician, when I would go into a nightclub, I'd be getting this terrible pittance for the amount of work that I would do to bring someone into a place and to put on a party. And I was always told by the producers, don't talk to the other musicians, don't talk to the other people who do things, because if you do that, they're going to steal your gig. They're going to steal your gig. They keep pushing that on us. You know, the question that came before that was talking about AB5, and like, one of the things I think that young artists need to know right now is, what are these things that people are doing? Pamela's a really great philosophy on how AB5 was created really just to play us and make it so that artists can't do the things that we do, and we're also blaming each other.
Right. Well, and we're also blaming the government, right? Because really, AB5 was created. I don't know how it got watered down, but the concept of AB5, the concept of corporations being required to pay people and put them on payroll and cover their, you know, cover their payroll taxes, cover their social security, cover their Medicare, all of those kinds of things, is a concept that has slowly been degraded and degraded and degraded to the point where now we are mad that corporations are being asked to do that. And what's happening is, what Dialect is saying in terms of competition is, things like AB5 are also having us further see ourselves as competition, and that's being institutionalized. And that's the thing we really have to be careful about, because when you look at AB5 and you're like, oh, well, they're going to hire this person instead of me unless I do XYZ, right? I feel like legislation like AB5 could be the first step, a very painful step, to be honest, but in the long term of not having people competing against each other for the lowest wage. Because that's what we're seeing happen right now.
You know, and the lowest wage thing is always what's terrible, because they always have us competing, like not over something grand or some share of the pie, but like over crumbs.
Yeah.
Really fighting with each other over the smallest thing. And that's the people who get the maddest. And they're like, I can't get this this very small, like this. I was just talking about the nightclub gigs and how poorly they pay us. And now we're like, oh, I'm mad that I can't get the nightclub gig unless they start paying me properly. I remember when I first was trying to do some theater, and I got hired to do a show where they were paying us like $20 because no one had any kind of budget. And they were like, well, but the equity people, they can't do that. And I was like, what? How are they going to do that? They're going to keep this $20 out of my hand, because I was hungry and I needed $20 right then. But I didn't understand that that's protecting me, because giving me $20 for all the work I'm doing is awful.
Yeah, it's totally awful. And I think that just on a practical level, when it comes to AB5, the thing that is most frustrating is, in the short term, it absolutely hurts the people who have the least power. Absolutely, period. That's what's happening right now. That's why it feels like something that is impossible to navigate. And it also feels like something that the government did to us. And I think the thing that we need to be careful about is making sure that we actually point to the corporations who, you know, who are the ones who should be responsible for actually meeting these things. Because the thing that I'm seeing happening is, instead of corporations stepping up and saying, okay, we'll pay you the wage that you need to get paid, is they're just firing people. Why aren't we mad at them? And I think that AB5 could be a step in the right direction if it's done in a way that is, if it's done in a way that does take care of the worker.
And just like the whole phenomenon about people beginning to dream in color when they started to have TV in color, remember that our dreams are currently predicated upon the models that exist. So even as we come into and we see the fake stuff in our dreams, remember to break down, tear apart, and forget about them dreams.
Yes.
Get dreams, make plans.
And I just want to reiterate, let's break down the taboo around talking about money, y'all.
Yeah,
we got to share with each other what we make, who pays us shit, who pays us well, all of that stuff, share it with each other, because that's the only way this is going to change.
It's not because you're a bad artist that you got paid $20 to do that thing, or you got asked to do it for free, or actually, when you look at it, it was a net negative. You spent $370 to do that one thing. That's not because you suck. And it's okay to share those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Sorry, I just unmuted here because I was like,
please get it. We'll rant for a while.
There were just a lot of snaps for folks not on video, just a lot of snaps, a lot of resonance, unfortunately. But I really love that we got to this place of our dreams and what's shaping our dreams. So I would love to ask folks on the panel, what dreams do we have for how, this performance making world that we're in and that is sacred to us, how can it move forward in a way that with practices that are ethical around labor and money?
Can I tie the last two and what Dialect and Pam were saying? Can I tie it all together a little bit? I just I want to name that I think one of our biggest weaknesses as a sector is that we call ourselves a nonprofit. We talk about the importance of our art, and we like to pretend that money doesn't matter, and that is not true, period. We live in a capitalist system. We all need to pay our bills. We like having money. And that is okay to like having money, because money is equivalent to power. Having money does not equate to capitalism. It does not equate to buy into a capitalist system, right? You can be like, fuck yeah, I'm a socialist, I'm a Marxist, I'm a whatever, right? And still be like, yeah, and I should be getting paid for my work. And I think part of why it's so hard for us to make progress is because we don't like to talk about money, and we don't like to admit that money is currently an integral part of the work that we do at every single level, whether it doesn't exist or whether it does exist. I think towards advice for young artists, the first is just never work for free, period. Just do never, ever, ever work for free. It is not worth it. I remember getting the advice as a young artist that was like, say yes to every opportunity. And I tried that once and I was like, hell no, I am never doing that again. Never work for free. It is not worth it. Even with, and this is hard, but even with people that you care about, ask, okay, if you can't pay me, what other compensation can you offer, right? What other things can we talk about? What could mutuality look like? I'm working with a client right now, a theater company, who we had negotiated an original contract. It turns out we needed a few more hours on it. They could extend it a little bit, but not enough. And so I was like, okay, cool. It's important to me that I finish this contract with you all with integrity. So it's going to take a little bit more time than we planned for and more than you have in your budget. Let's name that up front. What else can you offer me? You know that we are about $400 actually away from what I am owed for this work. So what could you offer me in compensation that might make up for that? And they were like, well, we do a summer training program. Maybe we could offer you a discount on that. And whether I do it or not, I'm like, at the very least, you all are recognizing that there is, in fact, an unfair trade happening here, and that you do owe me more money, and that there's ways for us to deal with that. So that, and then the other piece of advice, and to tie it all together and thinking about my dreams for the future, the other piece of advice I have is do not trust, especially institutions, that they have your best interests at heart, even if you love the people that are there. And the reason for that being is that we just have bad labor practices in the arts, period. Don't get me wrong, I love a union. I don't think our unions are set up in the best way to protect our workers, whether those are the artists or the administrators. So many, when I'm doing racial justice consulting work, so many theaters that I talk to, I'll be like, okay, cool. What's your grievance policy? Who handles your HR? How do you all do hiring? Right? All of these basic things that other businesses literally have down to practices and science, and we have ways to do this. I think in the creative sectors, we like to be like, oh, it's loosey-goosey, or we haven't had time to think about that, right? And so we see all of these ways in which not having a system that has been deeply thought through just continues to propagate white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, all these nasty things, right? And so one of the dreams that I have for the future is a cultural sector that recognizes all of these things and has also worked to develop itself, that is yeah, we have clear hiring practices. We use rubrics or whatever the hell to like do these things. We practice open bookkeeping at our organization so that whenever we go to a staff meeting, we have a moment to check in about where we're at on our profit and loss statement as an organization. Everybody knows who's getting paid what. We have that equity. And so maybe not everybody has like input on that budget, right? That's a big next step. I'm talking about like my next step dream here, right? Like, but at the very least, everybody is educated on how to do those things and is able to participate in that conversation and knows what their stake in it is. That to me as a next step, like basic level dream is like, let's just have some actual, like, let's be the professionals that we actually are. That would be great.
Yes. Yeah, just lifting up this idea that the nonprofit industrial complex and the arts ecosystem was built by and for highly educated white people, upper middle class white people. It has been replicating and perpetuating these structures rife with white supremacy for decades. So I dream of an arts sector and a theater ecosystem that is more inclusive and more reflective of the folks that actually live in the place where the theater is being made. For example, in Philadelphia, we're only 35% white in our city, but every Lord Theater is run by white people, and the board is, 90% white at most of them, or 100% white at many of them. The foundations and funding entities are predominantly white. So we need more representation, and we need more inclusion, more diversity, and on all fronts, racial and otherwise. And my Dialect and Pam were talking about this race to the bottom, which is the term for like everyone competing for smaller and smaller crumbs. Yeah, we deserve, arts workers deserve a living wage and a thriving wage. And to get there, we need emerging artists to stop working for free, and we need organizations to stop asking folks to work for free or underpaying folks. When you're right out of your BFA program, you should not be going into an unpaid internship, and the theater should not be having an unpaid internship program. Just shut that shit down.
Called volunteering. It's not an internship. It's called volunteering.
That's right. And if I want to volunteer for your arts organization, I will offer that to you because I have class privilege or whatever. And then a couple other things I dream about. I dream about more transparency. Like right now we have a system where you can go to GuideStar and find out what the artistic director at the theater company that you're working for earned last year on the 990, because that's a public document. But we need way more transparency about budgets. And as Daniel said, we need community involved budgeting processes to be more equitable and transparent. We need folks to reduce the stigma around talking about money and to just name what their hourly, daily, and weekly rates are. I want to lift up Wage for Work, wageforwork.com, WAGE, that's doing a lot of this kind of work more in the visual arts realm, but it applies to theater and dance and other forms, which is all about wage transparency. And then I just encourage folks to recognize that the systems and structures are designed to disempower artists and low-wage workers, and to see that for what it is and do what you need to do to jump that hurdle and empower yourself to learn and self-educate around financial models, financial planning, long-term thinking, your own debt, your own credit. Like there is so much resource out there, and yes, it's overwhelming. And as Pam noted, it's designed intentionally to be confusing, but Pam's website, Brunch and Budget, is a really great resource, and their podcast is awesome. I have a bunch of resources on my website, amyelainesmith.com, that points people to learning more about taxes and what you can deduct as an artist and what a profit and loss statement looks like, and articles and websites that'll help you learn more about financial empowerment in this environment that is so disempowering in so many ways.
I also want to piggyback off of that. And if any of this feels really daunting, it is. If you've ever made a financial mistake in your life, right, raise your hand. Anytime we make a financial mistake, we're also taught that we failed at finance. When you make a mistake in money, you're like, oh, I'm bad at money. I must just be done with this. And again, that's another story that we're taught, right? If you've ever had credit card debt, if you've ever missed a payment, if you've ever gone over budget, whatever it is, there's a story that we're told that we're just not good at this. And artists especially are told, oh, we're not good at money, so we've decided it's not important, right? And I think the thing to keep in mind is there's no such thing as being good at money or bad at money. It's just learning how to get through it. And a big phrase that we like to use is it's not about financial literacy, it's about financial resilience. Mm-hmm. It's not about, I'm going to learn all of these numbers and I'm going to, learn all of the math around it. It's about how do you bounce back and how can you bounce back every single time a little bit faster and a little bit stronger. And I think when it comes to money, it's all about those baby steps. I have a literature degree. I went into finance literally knowing nothing. And I remember reading the Wall Street Journal and looking at it and being like, holy crap, this is literally a whole other language. I have no idea what they're saying. None of these words are real. And it's going to feel like that, especially if it's new to you. And just know that that's okay. And know that anytime you take that first step or anytime you have a setback, it's okay. You're not bad at money. You're just living your life.
And on the artist tip, I want us to be prepared to set our lives up, set our financial lives up in a way that we can do the hard part of art. Because one of the big things about finance, we were talking about how money is power. Money is also the ability to speak freely. Money is the ability to be emotional. Money is the ability to be vulnerable. Money is the ability to grieve. When you don't have enough money to pay for a casket or a funeral, you can't even grieve and you get broken down even further. And every artist in here, I don't care what your medium is, you hate the pop version of your art because it does the easy thing. It does the lazy thing. Oh man, Broadway sucks because it's a whole bunch of musicals of TV shows and movies because that's the easy thing. Oh man, the music genre I'm in sucks because it's all about this one subject matter. That's because it's easy. The money part of art is very hard. So the financially successful art things do the easy part of art. We have to make it so that we have structures that are easier and make sense so that we have the room and bandwidth to create, share, and promote the challenges of art. And it's not that, whatever your medium, whatever your thing is, you're challenging art that you do. It's not that your challenging art can't be accepted and people can only accept pop art. Look at sports. Look at every team sport where people are like, I don't care about scoring. You care about rebounding and teamwork and hustle, determination, all these other little things, because they understand in a zero-sum situation, we only win when we do the hard part. What people don't understand and what we've had buried as artists is that artists are trying to win too, but it's not a zero sum, it's a circle. So if we all are going to win, we all have to challenge and do the hard part. And that's why that weirdo indie off the wall style of your genre you do does matter and does belong in this entire financial world.
Oh,
I'm just saying.
That was good. Woo.
It's a Sunday morning where I am, and I'm sure we're all different traditions, but that feels like a word. So I'm just appreciating you. Actually, Dialect and Pam, y'all, can you believe we almost at this hour? Folks are going to be able to continue in a workshop with you. So I'd love for you to share what folks can expect if they want to tune in.
Yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to talk a lot about, we're going to give you guys a background about the racial wealth divide and a little bit of detail, a lot of the stuff you're already going to know colloquially about how the systems have affected us and how art ties together with policy and with education and together create the common sense that is this dystopian world that we live in.
Yeah, and we're going to make steps to reverse it.
Yeah, we're going to reverse engineer it because we got the game to do that. I mean, we, the collective, we, all of we.
Amazing. And it was sounding like, there was some kind of more getting into like personal finance questions coming up from the chat. And it sounds like some of those, whether written or unspoken yet, that workshop might be a place where you can get some more information. So we hope that you'll check it out. And who you all, like just want to thank you for the folks on the panel. Thank you for your labor. Ways that you have thrown down up to this moment and this really potent conversation. Folks who have been actively listening, contributing with your questions, your energy, and other ways from afar. Thank you for your labor as well for showing up to this moment. I think that just the last thing that I will close on is I think Dialect. What did you say? I'm not gonna paraphrase this well, but to for us to all get there, like we all have to challenge. So I wanna lift that up in this moment, and also make sure, Daniel, do folks know how they can follow you and continue to connect with you? I know Amy shouted out her website, and I know there's still a chance for folks to connect with Dialect and Pam.
Totally. The best way to do it is through my website, which has a horrible, boring URL. And I've got to remind myself what it is. It's danielmark.squarespace.com, because I wasn't paying for that URL at the time. I'm actually in the process of redoing my website though, but you can contact me through it. Just please be as thorough as possible in your first email. During this session, I got an email that just says, "Where are you located? Interested in talking to you more." But they don't tell me. So let me know what your budget is. Let me know what your problems are. I'm here to talk. I love consulting with folks and doing that work. Just be thorough. Please reach out though.
Amazing. So wishing everyone deep breaths and whatever you most need for the rest of your day and the conference. Thanks for our time together, y'all.
Thank you so much.
So good, y'all. We would like for y'all to take a break. Go get some food, go get some rest, go get some water wherever you are in the world. Just gigantic, deep gratitude to our community. And we will be taking an hour for lunch. And please return back here at noon. We will be starting with our art share. Ross Bechler, Pratik Motwani, Baba Israel, and Grace Galou with Soul Inscribed and collaborators with Cannabis the Musical. So please return at noon for our art share. We will be live streaming that on the Howl Round through the Hoppin' Tune. And then for all of you who are registered attendees, you will be invited to join us inside the Zoom for the new common sense using art to bridge the racial wealth divide with Brunch and Budget's Pamela Capalad and Dialect. Thank you all so much. Have a great break. Stretch your bodies. Get healthy. We're doing this work. Where's my hammer? All right, y'all. I'm going to go get a snack so I can do some more work.
Lift up out of the ashes and soar into the spotlight. At times doesn't feel right, too much too soon. Step out and take it to them. Reach out and send your message, cause you know that it is your time. You know that it is your time. Rise and shine your light again. Shine your light, my friend. It all comes back again. Just rise and shine your light again. Shine your light, my friend. It all comes back. Reach for the stars, you know who you are. It's a one-way journey. Follow your dreams, bless up the scene. Just tell them your story. Cause them don't know about all of the sacrifices